Well, let's bring on an expert on this topic, someone who's been, namely, kind of in the crosshairs because the Hindu American Foundation has been called out repeatedly by some of these folks trying to get Caste on the books in different venues. Suhag Shukla joins us now, and we really appreciate her time because she's been making the rounds on different media venues as someone who's been seeing this matter develop over a number of years. Suhag, thank you for being with us. Give us your perspective on what took place in Seattle. Was it done in a hasty manner, or is this just the way laws like this get on the books?
You know, laws are definitely not made in this manner. I mean, first of all, to Jonathan's point, yes, there was a ground game, but the ground game actually came from across the country. These were not local people concerned about a local issue. And I would say that those who are going to be most directly impacted by this were the ones who were opposing the proposal, and they were caught off guard. In terms of rulemaking, to be able to, a lot of the headlines say that history's been made. Yes, history has been made, that after a century, we're seeing laws that specify and single out communities, specifically communities of color. It was bad enough that the original proposal said South Asians. And I think that, some of the letters that we had sent expressing and flagging some constitutional concerns about equal protection and due process got the council member to try to remedy it. And she actually made it worse. She added Southeast Asians, specifically Japanese people, as well as some African communities. And she called out Nigerians, Senegalese, and Somali people as somehow being so inherently bigoted alongside South Asians that we merit a special law that's going to police our communities.
Suhag, I wanted to ask you really quick. I mean, at the end of the day, you've been following Sawant in her career, I'm sure, from a distance. What's her angle here? What's her motive in suddenly bringing this up? Because, again, her playbook seems to be everything you just laid out. She's all about mobilizing, but also bringing in a tremendous amount of support from outside of Seattle, not just nationally, but she also has a global following. What is she trying to accomplish with this?
Look, I think she and her allies are more concerned about politics in India and the ground that they've lost there. The current political party in power, the BJP, is to them, just Nazism or whatever it is, in spite of the fact that this is a democratically elected government there and a party there. So what's happening is that the Indian American community becomes collateral damage. They're dragging issues from India to city councils where honestly the focus should be on safe streets, safe neighborhoods, and instead expending money on targeting minorities and making the city of Seattle less safe and less welcome for all people.
So, Hog, I want to play a video for you that was released by the Equality Labs executive director, Mori Sundarajan. We've had her come on our programs in the past and very articulate, passionate about this subject matter. I want to get your reaction to what she said in the aftermath of the Seattle law getting passed.
Sure.
JB from Seattle on this wonderful historic day where Seattle has become first in the nation to ban caste discrimination. It is the first city outside of South Asia to do so. And I just want to tell everybody this is a win that is rooted in Dalit feminism. We have seen here that this is where an intersectional politics really work. And we won because caste-oppressed people were not alone. We were flanked by workers. We were flanked by other feminists, people who work with survivors of domestic violence, queer folks, indigenous folks, Black liberationists. There was no movement that didn't see themselves in Dalit struggle because we were already deeply embedded with them in a shared vision for liberation. So I'm so proud to be here and to have seen this incredible win. And for folks to know just the scope and the scale of what we did, we had over 4,000 emails, 200 organizations, and a coalition of 30 caste-oppressed civil rights organizations that make up and support over hundreds of thousands of caste-oppressed people across North America. So this is our time, and I think the caste equity movement is such a beacon of hope because basically, we are making interfaith and intercaste alliances that really help us confront our intergenerational wounds. And what we are seeing is that South Asians do not want to be connected to each other through the trauma of caste anymore. And so it's incredible to see these kinds of political processes as pathways for deep healing. And we had many people who testified for the first time. And I think the thing that I was just so moved by was that how our people turned pain into power. Is there hope? There is definitely hope. And in many ways, the organizing around the caste equity movement is so powerful because it shows us a different way of how we might interact with each other as South Asians. It tells us that we can let go of our intergenerational trauma and build meaningful intercaste, interfaith, and multiracial relationships that can heal us as well as point us to radical Dalit feminist futures. Jai Bhim and Jai Savitri.
I think her pitch is like letter perfect now in terms of what she's trying to get across. Give me your perspective.
Well, I don't think she's actually solved any problems. The Carnegie Endowment survey, one of the most reliable surveys on Indian American attitudes, show that caste-based discrimination is exceedingly rare. I would say that even one case is one too many, and existing policies have not even been tested. And there are categories like national origin and ancestry that are a broad umbrella. They're facially neutral, meaning that they don't necessarily point to any single person from a group or a background that's always going to be seen as a victim or is always going to be seen as the victimizer. And so categories like ancestry or even ethnicity and national origin adjacent categories are broad enough and are generally applicable enough that they have evolved as America becomes increasingly diverse. And so these could and should arguably cover caste-based discrimination. I think that a couple years down the line, her legacy will be that she endangered a micro minority in this community, and she endangers people from all social backgrounds, from all caste backgrounds. You know, they talk in these terms of caste oppressed and caste dominant. We're all here in the United States as a micro minority, brown, visibly a minority. And there are areas where we need to be working together against the types of discrimination that the vast majority of Indians do report facing. That same survey, Carnegie, said that over half the people surveyed, and there were 1,000 people responding to that, said that they had faced some sort of discrimination. Most of them were facing color-based discrimination. So to now put a target on all of us with these special policies that now put the target on all South Asians is the classic self goal. And that is what her legacy is going to be.
Suhag, I was listening to, what was just shared moments ago, and, Equality Labs is clearly an advocacy group. Yet at the same time, I'm listening to that, and half of that I couldn't even follow. What about for the average Indian American, right? The average Hindu American? How are they feeling about this? Because it sounds like I'm talking or listening to an academic, and I want to know how this translates actually into the diaspora, to the average person just listening to this language and this talk. How are they reacting and feeling right now?
Yeah, I think, for a lot of average people, what we've learned in our conversations with the community is one, a lot of people don't know what the downstream impact is going to be. Because on paper, and in the way that they've been able to kind of build the narrative and get the support from the mainstream media is there's this widespread discrimination, which is not founded in any verifiable evidence, but in their survey, Equality Lab survey, which the Carnegie survey has a lot to say about, including the fact that there's confirmation bias, sample bias, manipulation of data by throwing out responses where people did not respond with a caste. And so you have this inflation of numbers for the purpose of advocacy. And now you have policies that are being made on that basis. Now, some of the testimony, or if you read the report, the Equality Labs report, what are the types of things that they're saying are indication of caste-based discrimination? A vegetarian diet, going to the temple, celebrating Diwali or Holi. So I'm not quite sure that the community is aware of what the implementation of this policy will look like, because you know that it's Equality Labs and the allies who have shaped the policy. And now, when you look at Seattle, for instance, there's funding set aside, $185,000 in the first year, $100,000 going forward. I'm sure there's going to be the hiring of caste experts. Well, who are they going to hire? Of course, they're going to hire the folks that have been kind of on the inside of these policies. And these organizations have a very definitive anti-Hindu record. And that's what we're going to start seeing, is that sort of kind of silencing effect of Hindus, South Asians generally. And that is what's the travesty of the situation.
Let me ask a quick follow-up. Aside from HAF and some others, when will Indian Americans mobilize and start fighting back for real and really getting involved? What is that going to potentially look like?
I really think that, look, the whole equation of caste with Indians or caste with Hinduism is something that is a legacy from colonialism, and it's a narrative that's the predominant narrative. It is fortified through our public school education system, where sixth graders learn this very reductive and inaccurate depiction of Indian society and Indians. So the narrative is going to be one that's a very tough battle to face. I think where the best hope is in the courts. Because the United States is built on principles of equal protection and due process. That's why we've taken a similar policy with the Cal State University system in California, where we're supporting two faculty members who are saying, hey, wait a minute, you can't just add a category that's facially discriminatory, where all of the legislative intent and testimony focused in on and demonized South Asians, and then think that you are going to be protecting all people in the same way on those campuses. So that's where I think this battle will ultimately come to justice.
Is it fair to say, though, there'll be like 50 battles like this in every state? You're going to have corporate battles, you'll have local city battles, you might have stuff at the county level, at the federal level. Is likely the next step?
It feels like it, but in my conversations with a number of places that might have been on the verge of passing or considering these types of policies, once you're able to sit down and get their ear and show them what legal precedent shows and what the downstream legal ramifications would be in putting into their policies a facially discriminatory category as opposed to facially neutral categories, I think most Americans understand. I think that this whole battle is a microcosm of a broader trend that's seeking to divide all of us rather than unify us on the basis of our humanity.
One of the aspects of this which is so challenging is that the CSU matter, some of these other universities, there have been no actual claims that have come forth. In the CSU matter, I mean, there was not one person. I'm sure maybe there's some discrimination that took place. I think that's what's so challenging is I don't think I know anybody that wants overt discrimination to take place, but it's really hard when there's not substantive evidence. I mean, for those of us that like work in that world, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but as a journalist, I mean, we cover court cases all the time. You have to have evidence. You can't just make charges.
Right.
And people, and I will say this, discrimination happens at all these different levels. I mean, people discriminate almost on a daily basis. I mean, people get judged for how they look, how they sound, who they associate with. If you look like a CEO or if you look like a homeless person, you get judged. You could be wearing a hoodie and they'll judge you doing that. So I'm really wondering, what you do about these matters when you have these private conversations with public officials, because I think it's also going to affect things politically. With 2024 on the horizon, we're seeing this movement spread across the country, and I think it's going to have a long-lasting impact. I mean, anyone who seems to oppose or at least challenge or question what's going on is branded as a bigot, is branded as a right-winger, and it's kind of stunning that this is the kind of invective that's out there.
Well, to me, if the only counter you have is an ad hominem and you can't debate on the merits, then you're not really standing on solid ground. And the question for those of us who have opposed the policy is not whether we need to have protections for caste-based discrimination. It's how are we going to protect against caste-based discrimination? And what we hold is that it has to be existing policy. Now, we know from the professors at CSU that when they approached the chancellor, when they approached even the union that's supposed to represent all faculty members, regardless of their background, to ask, well, hey, have there been any allegations, any claims filed? And the answer was no. The same thing is happening at Brown University, which was one of the most recent universities to add caste to their non discrimination policy. They did not have a single allegation made. And the one case that is pending, and that is the one with the California Civil Rights Department having gone after Cisco. If you do some digging into the actual facts of the case, there's some real questions that we should be asking about the California state government and perhaps an abuse of power. Certainly, the defendants are asking that because they have most recently filed a sanctions motion. The story is the way the media has presented that John Doe, who is a self identified Dalit, was the only Dalit in this department at Cisco, and that two of these other Indian origin managers discriminated against him. Well, one of those managers is the one who was a classmate of his from IIT, which is like the Indian Institute of Technology. It's like the premier Ivy League of India. The manager recruited him. If this manager, who also happens to have two relatives who are Dalit, had some animus against Dalits, why would he have done that? John Doe also signed a package of several $1 million in stock grants, was amongst the highest paid employees at Cisco. And here's this clincher, that in that department there are only 3 head positions. One of them was held by a self-identified Dalit. But the story that we have seen in mainstream media is that you have all of these high caste Hindus running amok and discriminating against this poor soul Dalit. And that if you just go a little bit below the surface into the court records, all of that is there in plain view.
That's just unbelievable listening to you right now. And, earlier you alluded to the fact that this fight will really be, in the courts, but at least in terms of the court of public opinion, it just isn't getting the proper coverage in the mainstream press. And that's why the average American is still clueless about this. How does this get out there then, this important narrative? Because I really believe this could set a precedent, not just for the Indian American community, Hindus out there, but any other group then, right? Or anyone else who wants to, start claiming class or caste discrimination, right?
Yeah.
What's stopping others? But at the same
That's
time, this story and narrative is so important to understand because I feel like it just keeps popping up out of nowhere. People are being caught off guard. And I think that's the playbook from the, likes of Shama Sawant and Equality Lab. So again, how does this narrative continue to get out there to the average American?
Well, I think this is where shows like this are so important. I mean, we had someone from, a historically socially disadvantaged community in India who has been a tech worker here in the United States since the early 2000s, pen an op-ed in which he was offering an alternative viewpoint that, look, I don't consider myself oppressed. I am a active member of my Hindu and South Asian community, and I oppose these proposals. I see them as dangerous. I see them as leading to, long-term discrimination against South Asians. And some of that's going to become very subtle because if South Asians and Hindus are seen as carrying this kind of legal morass with them, or even this kind of institutionalized implicit bias, why would I want to hire South Asians, right? So he penned an op-ed. I can't tell you how many rejections he saw. We were trying to help him get it pitched and get it placed because it was an important perspective, one that's been ignored in this very convenient and lazy narrative of there's one group that is perpetually oppressed. Let's forget the fact that they've gone to like very wealthy, expensive private schools, or have lived in some of the highest income areas in the country in California. And yet, when there's an alternative viewpoint from that same community, it's demonized. In fact, council members Sawants also demonized people when I think it was council member Nelson who pointed out that, hey, I've gotten a letter from another group that says that they are Dalit and they oppose this. And she said, well, every community has their kind of sellouts. And she pointed to African Americans who might oppose some of the trends in DEI and just immediately diminished their voices. If she is, I mean, that's in fact is so patronizing because she claims to come from a dominant caste background. So now she's going to silence. Where is her, call for equality and lifting the voices of the oppressed there when they don't agree with her?
Well, it does seem that I think one of the disconnects I have in this matter is because Shama Sawant, in her speech during that victory speech, effectively said that she was a Brahmin, and then took her pot shots at India, which I see as kind of a standard practice. But India is being run right now by Prime Minister Modi, who was democratically elected, and I don't think he came from some kind of fancy upper caste background. From what I recall, I understand he would sell chai at train stations as a child. I mean, to me, that seems like someone who came from nothing and has built this unbelievable career. I think he's, quite frankly, the most powerful politician in the world right now.
Well, yeah.
Frankly speaking, he's controlling the world's largest democracy. So I just find some of this rhetoric, I think it takes away from some of their arguments, which, let's face it, I don't think anybody wants discrimination to take place. But, I think the evidence has to demonstrate that, and people should fight it out, and hopefully we'll get this thing settled in the courts once and for all. But I do think we've been covering it so aggressively because I think it's a major situation, kind of a flashpoint in terms of our experience here as part of the diaspora.
Well, if I could just add a couple of things there to what you said is that, yes, you're right that the current Prime Minister Modi, comes from what's designated as an OBC background. The current president comes from a tribal background. The former president came from a scheduled caste or Dalit background. So, those are inconvenient facts for the activists that are pushing these policies, because, as I said at the beginning, their gripe is actually with the current political party in India. And the other thing is that, in terms of a self goal, quite honestly, the only people that I've been seen engaging publicly in casteist rhetoric are these so-called Dalit activists who are constantly demonizing quote unquote Brahmins. And when I said that they have scored a self goal, what they don't understand is that while in India, there might be embedded into the law ideas of a permanent victim and permanent victimizer, in the United States, that's not the case. So some of their rhetoric, if they continue with it, whether they're professors teaching and creating a hostile environment in their classrooms where students are from those Brahmin backgrounds and feel very uncomfortable or feel that it's impacting their educational experience, well, guess what? They're going to be liable regardless of whether there's a caste category or not, because ancestry would cover their casteism.
We're going to continue to follow this. Suhag Shukla, Executive Director and co-founder of the Hindu American Foundation. Thank you so much for providing all this context for us.
Thanks a lot.